I'm very privileged to have been invited by the organizers, and thank you very much for the Academy to inviting United Nations Alliance Associations to attend and to contribute to your conversation. I wish to introduce UNOC. I wish to inform you about its mission, about its values, and what exactly we do practically with faith-based organizations, with religious leaders and faith leaders. I don't know how many of you heard about United Nations Alliance of Civilizations. By sheer raise of hand, can anyone tell? Fantastic, thank you very much. And I'm sure by end of my short introductory remarks, all of you will know. We are a special initiative of the United Nations Secretary General, which was launched in 2005 and co-sponsored by the governments of Spain and Turkey. And we've been launched in the aftermath of the terrorist attack of 2001, 2004, when the world witnessed horrific terroristic attacks. And there was a crisis and the global need to respond, to address the root causes of those attacks and to provide a solution. Following the assessment and the practical recommendations which were put forth by the experts, the initiative has been established, and the mission was phrased as follows: to improve understanding and cooperation among nations and peoples, and to reduce polarization at local and global levels. We are guided by the principles of the United Nations Charter, as well as by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and also by the priorities of the United Nations Secretary General. And in the UN system, we like to call ourselves as the soft tool for prevention of conflicts and to contribute to peace and security agenda of United Nations. The mission, as in previous speakers were saying, is more than ever relevant, because we observe the trends of growing hate speech, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and we have to produce a response, very practical, very concrete, on various levels. We observe that religious and ethnic minorities are among the world's most vulnerable groups, especially in zones of conflict, and they face a lot of discrimination and threats in various forms, including violent extremism attacks or exclusionary policies of the governments. As the High Representative for UNOC, Mr. Moratinos, recently said, the problem is not the faith. The problem is those who manipulate the faithful, and therefore we need to address this through our tool. The tool is intercultural and interreligious dialogue. And we call for peace, we call for respect and mutual understanding, all those values which are very much aligned with all religions of the world, you name it. And whether you follow certain faiths or whether you do not follow any of the faith at all, there is no set of beliefs that would endorse violence, endorse harm and destruction. We look at FBOs, faith-based organizations, religious leaders and faith leaders as our main partners to have our mandate achieved. Along with men and women, youth, academic sector representatives, of course, governments and international organizations. Why religious leaders in particular are so much important for us? As it states in the Secretary General's Action Plan for Prevention of Violent Extremism, the religious leaders have a very unique vantage point for mediation, for reconciliation, and for reconstruction of the relations in the community to build trust and understanding. That's why their voices will be heard perhaps more than anyone's else. How do we work with them? How do we work with the religious leaders and FBOs? We have 3 levels of engagement. We have advocacy, we have knowledge sharing, and we have programming, which we manage directly. When it comes to advocacy, since 2013, we have organized more than 30 events on the global scale where we would put together religious leaders and FBOs of leading faith, as well as the policymakers on the global scale. I will not tell you all of those events. However, it would be important for you to know that in 2015, we have convened with President of General Assembly, with the Secretary General of United Nations, the high-level panel in the GA on promoting tolerance and reconciliation, fostering peaceful, inclusive societies, on countering violent extremism, results of which have informed the SG's action plan for PVE. Secondly, 1 year later, we have, with Spanish government, convened a summit for religious leaders for peace in the Middle East. The religious leaders representing Judaism, Islam, and Christianity got together and they drafted and adopted the Alicante Declaration. Allow me to quote, please. In the declaration, they recognize the wholeness of the land of all three religions, and they have called for the cessation of incitement, misrepresentation, and distortion of the image of the other and of the neighbor. End of quote. According to the declaration, they also committed to establish a standing committee which would work to implement the principles of the Alicante Declaration. 1 year later, in 2017, we have convened religious leaders and asked them, what have you done after the Alicante Declaration adoption? And can you please exchange your views and your perspectives and your commitments moving forward in presence of the Secretary General, who was present and participated in that panel in New York. Finally, last year, in April 2018, we have, together with the Permanent Mission of Kazakhstan to the UN, convened the Security Council Area Formula meeting on the topic Religious Leaders for a Safer World. When it comes to our programs, our concrete works which we do from New York globally, first of all, under the Fellowship Program, Young Peace Builders Program, under Youth Solidarity Fund and Peace App, we bring together young men and women from various diverse cultural and religious backgrounds to meet, discuss, and join together to do common projects that would allow them to accept the differences and recognize that despite their religious differences, they can share common humanity and make their world a better place to live. Secondly, we also give awards under Intercultural Innovation Award, which is the partnership with BMW Group. We empower civil society organizations which have outstanding work and provide examples how religious minorities can be integrated in the society, therefore preventing marginalization and exclusion. Finally, we have a Spread No Hate initiative, where we counter hate speech through, against cultural, religious, and ethnic minorities. What is important to note before I talk about knowledge sharing is that prior to 2010, as far as the UN has been concerned, programs and agencies, there were very sporadic engagements of the religious leaders and faith-based organizations in its work, no matter which sector. However, since 2010, UNOC and a few other agencies joined the so-called United Nations Interagency Task Force on Religion and Development. Today, after a decade of its work, we have up to 20 programs and agencies on the one hand, and more than 50 leading FBOs working together to address UN global causes, primarily in human rights, development, and peace and security, which is, I believe, quite an exemplary trend. And we believe that it's very important that we continue doing this work in the task force. I don't know how many of you have learned already, but last year, in September 2018, noteworthy development took place. The Faith Advisory Council to the UN Interagency Task Force on Religion has been established and announced as such. And it represents currently over 30 representatives of FBOs, representing diverse religious traditions, thematic competencies, and regional diversity. And the Council is determined to make sure that they provide ongoing counsel, ongoing expertise to the UN across all the sectors where UN is working. Finally, many FBOs also actually contribute to the work of the United Nations Security Council. What is coming next in our program of work, and what do we try to achieve? Last year, in the Forum of UNOC in November, which we convened in New York in the headquarters, we had convened a panel on the role and responsibility of religious leaders and faith-based organizations. There were a number of very important recommendations drawn to the UN, to the governments, as well as to practitioners as such in the world, which I would like to let you know about them. Specifically, they were asking for practical skills-based trainings on mediation, ICTs, this is where the smart citizen concept is really key, as well as social media to offer to religious leaders to expand their reach to the younger demographics, which apparently there is a gap with younger demographics. Secondly, they were emphasizing that it's important to collaborate on mediation with religious leaders from the very beginning, as opposed to after the crisis has already erupted, and to have them engaged and heard from the very beginning. They were also saying that more teachings that encourage children to develop tolerant views are important and should be offered through the governmental work. And also they were saying that young religious leaders are untapped potential and must be given much more attention by the UN, and we should invite them more to attend policy and practical discussions. So with all of those recommendations in mind, we'll look into the following priorities and concrete things to do. Number one, we will aim to help young religious leaders to identify signs of radicalization in local communities and develop a program for this. Number two, we're going to work with governments to have our religious leaders increased, like Mr. Baruko was saying, and we will provide the national authorities expertise to develop curricula that would include understanding of and respect for plurality of religions, cultures, and societies. Finally, we'll look into designing of the very unique capacity building training, which would include, on the one hand, young representatives of faith-based organizations, on the other hand, journalism students, reporters, and social media practitioners. When it comes to young reporters, they would train young religious leaders how to use social media, ICT, and how to make storytelling techniques useful for them when they speak to their community and especially young people. On the other hand, young religious leaders will inform the media practitioners how to cover the stories, how to cover events where the religious component is present to make voices of moderation heard in a greater way. We hope to create a glossary on interfaith dialogue for media practitioners and a set of recommendations and best practices on how to cover the events related to the religion. In conclusion, I would like to reiterate the invitation of EuARE that we always would like to learn from the practitioners, from the academic sector, from research centers, what is the latest trend, what are the latest findings, what are your observations, which we, EuARE, United Nations in broad terms, should be aware of, so that we inform our programming and our policy work, advocacy in the UN, and make much more effective and much more needed impact on the ground. Thank you very much, and I look forward sincerely to participate in your conference and hear more from you about those learnings and trends. Thank you.
Thank you.